We know that there's a very strong connection with vitamin D and overall fat on the body. Subcutaneous fat, fat accumulation. We also know that vitamin D gets sequestered, held in fat cells. So as we lose fat, more vitamin D is liberated. But what about the pot belly? What about the visceral fat? The visceral fat that isn't just unsightly because it's a pot belly, but visceral fat that is metabolically dangerous, very bad. Okay, leaks inflammatory cytokines. One of the things that all dietary patterns that disagree on all kinds of things at least agree on. Visceral fat is not a good thing. Can vitamin D levels be playing a role in our visceral fat? It seems like there could be some interesting correlation there, and it may have to do with something called the parathyroid. But let's talk about the research first and then get into the mechanistic side. After today's video, you can save 25% off your entire grocery order through Thrive Market. Okay, so that link is down below. It is an exclusive link that not everyone gets. That'll save you 25% off your entire first grocery order, as well as get a free gift. So I definitely recommend you check them out. Makes it so you can do all your shopping online, just sort by diet type, and it gets delivered to your doorstep in a couple of days. I'm telling you, like, if you have kids, if you're a busy person, like, it's a game changer. Absolutely a game changer, just because I don't have to go to a grocery store and worry about what they have. I know Thrive Market has it. They have new items coming in all the time. They're always vetting things out. They're always researching. They're always consulting with people to make sure they get good items, not just whatever sells. So anyway, that link is down below. Check them out after this video. So there was a study that was published in the journal Nutrition and Metabolism. It took a look at 1,105 people, so it was a pretty large study. And it was taking a look at the correlation between visceral fat and vitamin D levels, and it was pretty illuminating. It found that there was a negative association between visceral fat levels and vitamin D. Okay, what that means is that the higher the amount of visceral fat, it seemed to be the lower amount of vitamin D. In fact, those that had the highest levels of visceral fat on their body were 4.9 times as likely to be deficient in vitamin D. How wild is that? They're actually able to look at this and say, out of all these people, we can tell that if you have high visceral fat, you're 4.9 times as likely to have low vitamin D. That's how strong this correlation is. But in science, we don't just lean on correlation. We have to have intervention. We have to look at things before we can ever say something's proven. And even then, we never say it's proven because things are always changing. But then there was another interesting study that was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. This one took a look at 171 people, and it did intervene with vitamin D, but it intervened in an interesting way. It intervened in a way that I would never ever suggest trying to get vitamin D. Okay, it intervened by giving them orange juice that was fortified with vitamin D, which seems like a good idea in theory until you realize there's like 60 grams of sugar. That's probably whatever, either way. Point is that there were a couple of groups, a regular orange juice group and a fortified orange juice group that had 100 IUs of vitamin D and 350 milligrams of calcium added to it. Okay, each group drank 3 glasses of orange juice every day. Okay, and they did this for 16 weeks. Okay, so it was a long study. And at the end of the study, it was pretty interesting. They found that the fortified orange juice group compared to the regular orange juice group had significantly reduced levels of visceral fat. In fact, it went down from a mean reduction of 13.7 centimeters squared in the group that had the vitamin D. Okay, and then compared to a 6.4 in the group that did not. 6.4 centimeters squared mean reduction. That's a pretty astronomical amount. And again, that's fairly strong intervention. The problem is that calcium was also added into the equation. And when I get to the mechanisms here, I'll explain why calcium is so important with this. So who knows what was really doing the trick there, but that was 300 IUs of vitamin D that were added essentially each day. What was wild is that when you look at the study a little bit deeper, they actually got rid of people that were vitamin D deficient. So if there had have been people that were vitamin D deficient, perhaps the results would have been even more enhanced. So these were people that were not deficient in vitamin D that still saw a potential reduction in visceral fat just by adding vitamin D into their diet. Now imagine if they were vitamin D deficient, that little bit would have made an even bigger dent and brought them up closer to baseline, potentially enhancing their effect even more. The problem here is this is really early stuff. We don't know exactly what's going on, but we do know that excess calcium can play a role in lipogenesis, fat accumulation or fat building or fat storage in a visceral fat cell. So what we can conclude to a certain degree, or at least hypothesize, is that when you are deficient in vitamin D, what ends up happening is you're not absorbing calcium. Okay, you don't absorb calcium as well if you're low in vitamin D. So consequently, what happens is something called the parathyroid gland. Parathyroid gland increases its output of parathyroid hormone. This parathyroid hormone then forces the evacuation of calcium out of your bones. Okay, this is why vitamin D is so important. Okay, calcium comes out of your bones, which not only makes your bones weaker, but also has an influx of calcium that can then go into the visceral fat cells. So you have this surge of calcium entering a visceral fat cell, triggering lipogenesis, fat accumulation. Somewhat speculative, somewhat of a hypothesis, but a mechanism that we know happens that we can correlate together. We're seeing the data in the observational stuff. We're seeing the interventional studies kind of giving us some positive data here. So this is the most likely mechanism here. So does taking supplemental calcium potentially help this? Possibly, because then if your serum levels of calcium are elevated, then maybe the parathyroid doesn't have to draw out calcium out of the bones. But taking supplemental calcium, according to the American Heart Association research, has its own set of negative drawbacks, such as potential atherosclerosis, right? Atherogenic effects. So we don't necessarily want to be supplementing calcium. We want to be getting calcium from our food in our bioavailable way. And more importantly, we want vitamin D that's going to allow the proper absorption of the right amount of calcium. So vitamin D from the sun is always going to be the best bet because that's going to be the bioavailable synthesizing of vitamin D that we need. Next up after that is going to be eating like the fatty fish, like the sardines, the mackerel, foods that have vitamin D in them, salmon. Okay, also eating things like free-range eggs. FYI, when you're looking at eggs, free-range eggs versus cage-free, free-range have 4 times the amount of vitamin D in them because the hens have been out in the sun. It does translate into the eggs. So eggs are a tremendous source of vitamin D. If you're plant-based or even if you're not, mushrooms, which have bioavailable vitamin D2, it's very, very similar molecularly. Takes literally a microscope to be able to see just the negligible difference. Vitamin D2 competes for a transport with vitamin D3, but if you eat enough in the way of vitamin D2 and mushrooms that have been out in the sun that get more active D2, you can still get vitamin D3 in your body. So getting it through your diet and getting it through the sun is far superior to doing it in supplement form. You don't see me typically talking about vitamin D supplements on this channel. What I will recommend is cod liver oil. Cod liver oil is going to get you the solid vitamin D3 and vitamin A in a triglyceride form, not in what is called an esterized ethyl ester form. Okay, so that's already good, but they also have a tremendous amount of the bioavailable retinol A and vitamin D that you need. So a great way to go, plus the omega-3s that you're getting from it too. If you absolutely positively must use a synthetic vitamin D, I recommend that you use one that is combined with vitamin K2. D3K2, so it helps the proper allocation of the vitamin D to do its job. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel, and I'll see you tomorrow.